Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get started. I should have known the moment we left the port of Miami that this voyage was cursed. The docks were too quiet, the air too heavy, the city skyline already dimmed by smoke rising from neighborhoods where the outbreak had taken root. The Pacific Glory was never meant to sail half empty, but that night she did, her decks echoing with the hollow sound of my boots as I made my rounds. I was a junior security officer, barely trained, barely trusted, but still wearing the uniform like it meant something. Truth is, the patch on my sleeve felt more like a lie than a badge of honor. The captain insisted we could make it. "Safer at sea than on land," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying the truth. We had a skeleton crew, engineers, cooks, a handful of stewards, and fewer than 50 passengers, most of them wealthy enough to buy their way onto what was billed as a sanctuary voyage. They boarded with too many suitcases, too much perfume, and too little understanding of what waited beyond the horizon. I watched them smile nervously, clutching champagne flutes, as if bubbles could drown out the sound of sirens still wailing on shore. The ship's horn bellowed once, a low, mournful sound that rolled across the water like a funeral dirge. I leaned against the rail, staring back at the city lights shrinking into the distance. Miami looked like a constellation on fire, 1,000 points of brightness flickering against the dark. I told myself we were lucky to be leaving, but deep down, I knew better. The ocean wasn't safety, it was isolation. And isolation was just another word for death delayed. The first day passed in uneasy silence. The passengers gathered in the dining hall, pretending it was a normal cruise. They dressed for dinner, clinked glasses, and laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I patrolled the corridors, listening to the hum of the engines and the faint creak of steel. Every sound felt amplified, like the ship itself was holding its breath. The crew whispered among themselves, wondering if we'd ever see land again. By the second night, the illusion of normalcy was already cracking. The news feeds had gone dark. The satellite channels that usually streamed endless entertainment now showed only static. The captain ordered the televisions in the lounges shut off, claiming it was to conserve power, but I knew it was to keep panic from spreading. Without distractions, the passengers grew restless. They asked questions we couldn't answer. How far had the infection spread? Were the quarantine zones holding? Would the government send ships to rescue survivors? I had no answers, only the weight of their stares. That evening I was stationed outside the dining hall. The chandeliers glowed dimly, casting golden light over linen-draped tables. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the air, masking the salt of the sea. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their bows trembling as much from fear as from music. I stood near the doorway, watching the passengers eat in silence, broken only by forced laughter. Then it happened. A man at the center table, a businessman from New York, I think, dropped his fork. His hand shook violently, knocking over a glass of red wine that spilled across the tablecloth like blood. He coughed once, twice, then doubled over. His wife screamed as he collapsed onto the floor, convulsing. The quartet stopped playing. The entire hall froze. I rushed forward, but even before I reached him, I saw the truth. His lips were blue, his eyes glassy, his skin pale and slick with sweat. He coughed again, this time spraying a mist of blood across the polished floor. The sound echoed in the silence, louder than the engines, louder than the sea. The captain barked orders. "Clear the hall! Get him to the infirmary!" 2 stewards grabbed the man under his arms, dragging him toward the exit as his legs kicked weakly against the carpet. His wife tried to follow, but I held her back, my hands gripping her shoulders as she screamed his name. The passengers scattered, some crying, some praying, some demanding answers. The chandeliers swayed as if the ship itself recoiled.
I stood there, my heart pounding, my uniform suddenly too tight.
I knew what I had seen.
I knew what it meant. We weren't safe at sea.
We had only carried the Outbreak with us, and the Pacific Glory had just become a floating coffin. The infirmary door slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. Two stewards stood outside, pale and trembling, their uniforms stained with the businessman's blood.
Inside, I could still hear him thrashing against the gurney, the sound of leather straps straining, the muffled cries of the nurse who had been bitten trying to restrain him.
The captain's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and final. No one enters.
No one leaves. We called it quarantine, but it was really a prison.
The infirmary was a white-tiled box with a single reinforced door and a porthole window smeared with handprints. I stood guard outside, my radio crackling with static, my pulse hammering in my ears. The passengers whispered as they passed, clutching their children, their jewelry, their useless passports. They looked at me like I was supposed to protect them, but I couldn't even protect myself from the truth. The infection was already here. That night, the ship felt different. The Pacific Glory had always been a floating palace. Bright lights, endless buffets, laughter spilling from casinos and theaters. Now the hallways were dim, the chandeliers flickered, and the air smelled of bleach and fear. The captain ordered the dining hall closed, the bars shuttered, the pools drained. He said it was temporary just until the situation stabilized, but I saw the way his hands shook when he lit his cigar. He knew as well as I did there was no stabilizing this. I patrolled the decks, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark.
Every creak of the hull made me flinch.
The ocean stretched out in every direction, black and endless, a reminder that there was nowhere to run.
On land, at least you could hide in basements, barricade yourself in supermarkets, cling to the illusion of walls.
Out here, the sea was both moat and tomb. Around midnight, I heard it, the first scream. It came from the infirmary, high-pitched and desperate, then cut off suddenly. I pressed my ear to the door, my breath fogging the steel. For a moment there was silence. Then came the sound of fists pounding against the inside, wet and furious, followed by a guttural growl that didn't sound human anymore. The nurse was gone. The patient was gone. What remained was something else entirely. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The stewards looked at me with wide eyes, waiting for orders I couldn't give. I wanted to tell them to run, to throw themselves overboard, to swim for shore, even if it meant drowning. Instead, I told them to hold their posts. My voice cracked, but they obeyed. That's the thing about uniforms. They make cowards look like leaders. By morning, the passengers were restless. They demanded answers, pounding on the locked doors of the bridge, shouting at crew members who had none to give.
Rumors spread faster than the infection, that the man had died, that he had risen, that the crew was hiding more cases.
Some claimed to have heard scratching in the ventilation shafts. Others swore they saw shadows moving on the lower decks. Fear turned them against each other. I watched two men nearly come to blows over a bottle of water. The captain finally addressed them in the atrium. He stood on the grand staircase, his uniform immaculate, his voice steady. "We are safe," he lied. "The situation is contained. Remain in your cabins until further notice." The passengers wanted to believe him. They clung to his words like lifelines, nodding, murmuring, retreating to their rooms. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He was already planning for the worst. That night I walked past the infirmary again. The porthole window was cracked, smeared with blood from the inside. Something moved in the shadows, pacing, waiting. When I leaned closer, I saw a face press against the glass. It wasn't the businessman anymore. His eyes were milky, his teeth bared, his skin grey and torn. He slammed his head against the window, again and again, until the glass rattled in its frame. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The sound followed me down the corridor, a relentless rhythm of bone against glass. I knew it was only a matter of time before the door gave way. We called it quarantine. But it was really a countdown. The pounding on the infirmary door stopped just before dawn. For hours it had been relentless, fists, elbows, skull against steel, each blow rattling through the corridor like a war drum. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl because you know it isn't peace, it's patience. I stood there with my flashlight trembling in my hand, waiting for the next sound. It came in the form of a scream. The nurse's voice, high and ragged, tore through the stillness.
I'll never forget it.
She begged for help, begged for God, begged for anyone to open the door. But no one moved. Not me, not the stewards, not the captain listening from the bridge above. We all knew what was happening. Her cries turned to gurgles, then to nothing. And then came the growl. When the door finally opened, it wasn't by choice. The lock gave way under the weight of bodies slamming against it. The metal screeched, hinges bending, and then the door burst outward. The businessman was no longer a man. His skin was grey, his eyes clouded, his mouth dripping with blood. He lunged forward, dragging the nurse with him, her throat torn open, her eyes wide and glassy. The stewards panicked.
One ran, the other froze. I should have drawn my weapon, but my hands wouldn't obey.
I just stood there, staring, until the infected man turned his head toward me. His jaw unhinged wider than it should have, teeth slick with red. He moved faster than I thought possible, slamming into the wall where I'd been standing a second before. I ran. The corridor filled with chaos.
Passengers screamed as the infected tore into them.
Blood sprayed across the white walls, painting them crimson. The nurse's body was dragged down the hall, her heels scraping against the floor. The infected businessman wasn't alone anymore. Others had turned, passengers who'd been coughing quietly in their cabins, crew members who'd hidden their bites. They came pouring out like a tide, snarling, clawing, hungry. I ducked into a stairwell, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved, my lungs burned, my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I pressed my back against the cold steel and listened. The sounds on the other side were inhuman, snarls, wet chewing, bones snapping. The ship had become a slaughterhouse. I should have gone back. I should have tried to save someone. But I didn't. I stayed in that stairwell, clutching my flashlight like it was a weapon, whispering apologies to no one. That's the truth of it.
I wasn't a hero. I was a coward. When I finally emerged, the corridor was unrecognizable.
Blood pooled on the floor, bodies lay twisted and broken, and the walls were smeared with handprints that led nowhere. The chandeliers above flickered, casting shadows that looked like figures still moving. I stepped carefully, my shoes sticking to the floor with every step. That's when I saw her. A little girl, no older than 10, crouched beneath a table. Her eyes were wide, her face streaked with tears. She clutched a stuffed rabbit so tightly the seams had split. She looked at me, silently begging for help. I froze. Behind her, one of the infected crawled on all fours, its jaw hanging loose, its eyes locked on her. I didn't think. I moved. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with everything I had. The metal connected with the infected skull, a sickening crack echoing through the hall. It collapsed, twitching, then went still. The girl whimpered, clutching her rabbit tighter.
I reached out my hand. It's okay, I lied.
You're safe now. She took my hand, her small fingers trembling in mine. I pulled her out from under the table, shielding her from the carnage around us. But I knew the truth. She wasn't safe.
None of us were.
The infection had spread too far, too fast. The ship was lost. As we moved down the corridor, I heard more screams, more growls, more doors breaking open. The infected were everywhere now, spilling through the decks like fire through dry wood. I tightened my grip on the girl's hand and whispered the only promise I could make. I'll keep you alive as long as I can. But even as I said it, I knew it was a promise I couldn't keep. The captain's order came down like a hammer. Seal the decks. Lock every cabin.
No one moves without clearance. His voice carried through the intercom, calm but absolute. the kind of tone that left no room for argument.
Within minutes, the ship transformed from a drifting hotel into a prison. Steel doors slammed shut, magnetic locks clicked into place, and the corridors echoed with the sound of passengers pounding from the inside. I was assigned to the middeck, tasked with locking down the starboard cabins. My keycard trembled in my hand as I swiped it across panel after panel, sealing families behind steel. Mothers begged through the crack of the door, fathers shouted, children cried. I told them it was for their safety, but the words tasted like ash. I knew what I was really doing, trapping them. The infected were spreading faster than anyone admitted. The businessman's collapse had been the spark, but by now the fire was everywhere. Crew members whispered about passengers coughing in their bunks, about blood on the sheets, about shadows moving in the ventilation shafts. The captain insisted it was contained, but I had seen the infirmary door burst open. Containment was a lie. As I moved down the corridor, a woman grabbed my arm through the narrowing gap of her cabin door.
Her nails dug into my sleeve, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered, "my husband's sick."
"Don't lock us in." For a moment I froze. I could hear him coughing behind. Her, wet and ragged, the sound of lungs drowning in blood.
I wanted to help. I wanted to be human.
But the captain's order echoed in my head. I pulled free and swiped the lock. The door sealed with a hiss, cutting off her screams. I kept moving. By nightfall, the ship was silent except for the engines and the occasional thud of fists against steel. The atrium, once filled with laughter and music, was now a cavern of shadows. The chandeliers swayed gently with the motion of the sea, casting fractured light across empty tables. I stood at the railing, staring down at the deserted lounge, and felt the weight of every locked door pressing against my chest. Then the noises began. At first, it was faint, scratching like rats in the walls. Then came the pounding, rhythmic and violent from multiple decks at once. Passengers screamed from behind their doors, begging to be let out. Some shouted prayers, others curses. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't stop the sound. It was everywhere, a chorus of desperation and hunger. The captain gathered us on the bridge. His face was pale, his uniform immaculate, his hands shaking just enough to betray him. "We hold the line," he said, "but we keep them contained until help arrives." But there was no help coming. The radios were dead, the satellites silent. We were alone, drifting in the Atlantic with a ship full of locked doors and the monsters behind them. I returned to my post, flashlight beam cutting through the dark.
That's when I saw it, a smear of blood beneath one of the cabin doors.
It seeped slowly across the carpet, dark and glistening.
I leaned closer, and that's when the pounding started again, furious, relentless, shaking the frame. I stumbled back, heart hammering, as the door bulged outward with each blow. The lock held.
For now, I turned and ran, the sound of fists chasing me down the corridor. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, where I collapsed against the cold steel, gasping for breath. My reflection stared back at me in the polished railing, eyes wide, face pale, uniform stained with sweat and blood.
I didn't look like a security officer anymore.
I looked like a prisoner. That night, I lay awake in the crew quarters, listening to the ship groan and the muffled screams echo through the decks. Every thud, every rattle of steel reminded me of the truth. We hadn't locked the infection out. We had locked it in with us, and sooner or later those doors would break. The engines died sometime after midnight. One moment the steady hum vibrated through the decks, a constant reminder that the Pacific Glory still had life in her. The next, silence swallowed everything.
No vibration, no thrum, just the groan of steel as the ship surrendered to the current.
I stood on the outer deck, flashlight beam cutting across black water, and felt the truth settle in my chest. We were adrift. The captain claimed it was sabotage, that someone panicked and damaged the fuel lines during the chaos. Maybe he was right. Maybe it didn't matter. The result was the same. We were a floating coffin carried wherever the Atlantic wanted to take us. The stars above looked sharp and cold, scattered across the sky like broken glass. The horizon was endless, a black wall pressing in from every side. Passengers gathered on the upper decks, whispering, clutching blankets against the chill. Without engines, the air systems faltered. The ship grew damp, the corridors heavy with condensation, the smell of salt and rust seeping into everything. I walked among them, my uniform still intact, though it felt more like a costume than authority. They looked at me with hollow eyes, waiting for reassurance I couldn't give. The girl I'd saved clung to my side, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. She asked me if the ship was broken.
I told her yes, but we'd fix it.
She nodded, trusting me, and I hated myself for lying. The truth was, I didn't know if we'd ever move again. By morning, the sea turned restless. Waves slapped against the hull, rocking the ship with a rhythm that made the chandeliers sway and the passengers stumble. The kitchens had gone cold, the freezers failing without steady power. We rationed what food we could salvage, but I knew it wouldn't last. The chef whispered to me that supplies were already spoiling. The smell of rot would come soon. The infected hadn't disappeared. They were still locked behind steel doors, pounding occasionally, reminding us they were patient. Every thud echoed through the decks, a reminder that we weren't alone. The captain ordered us to reinforce the locks with chains and welding torches. Sparks flew in the dark corridors as we sealed doors that should never have been closed. I wondered how long steel could hold against hunger that never tired. That night, I stood on the bridge, staring out at the horizon. The ocean stretched forever, black and merciless. The radio crackled with static. No voices, no signals, just the hiss of emptiness. I tried every channel, every frequency, but the world had gone silent. The captain lit another cigar, his hands shaking as he muttered about rescue ships.
I didn't believe him.
Rescue required hope, and hope had drowned long before the engines died. The passengers grew restless. Some demanded lifeboats, insisting they could row to shore. They didn't understand how far we were from land, how unforgiving the Atlantic could be. A group gathered near the Davits, shouting, pushing, ready to lower the boats themselves. I was sent to stop them. I stood there, facing a dozen desperate faces, their eyes wild with fear. They shouted that the crew was lying, that we were keeping them trapped, that the infection was spreading. I tried to calm them, but my words fell flat.
One man lunged for the release lever.
I drew my pistol. The shot echoed across the deck, louder than thunder. The man fell, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with shock. The others froze, staring at me, at the smoking barrel in my hand. I told them to step back. My voice cracked, but they obeyed. Fear is stronger than reason. The lifeboats were destroyed that night. The captain ordered them cut loose, set adrift so no one could try again. I watched them drift into the darkness, empty shells bobbing on black waves. Each one felt like a piece of hope severed, swallowed by the sea. I returned to my cabin, the girl asleep on the cot, clutching her rabbit. I sat beside her, staring at the wall, listening to the ship creak and the ocean whisper. We were adrift, powerless, surrounded by water and death, and for the first time I wondered if drowning might be kinder than what waited on board. It started with whispers on the upper deck. Passengers huddled in corners, their voices low but urgent, eyes darting toward the lifeboats hanging in their cradles like promises of salvation. By dusk, the whispers had grown into shouts. They weren't going to wait for the captain's orders anymore. They weren't going to die locked in steel cabins while the infected clawed at the walls. I was ordered to patrol the promenade, but the truth is, I already knew what was coming. Desperation has a sound, and it was in every footstep, every frantic glance. The lifeboats were the only hope left, even if they were illusions. The Atlantic stretched endless and merciless, but to the passengers, even a rowboat on black water seemed safer than the ship. The first group made their move just after midnight. A dozen of them, led by a man in a torn suit, stormed the Davits. They carried kitchen knives, broken bottles, anything sharp enough to make a point. Their faces were pale, eyes wild, voices hoarse from shouting.
"Lower the boats!"
They screamed. "We're not staying here."
I raised my pistol, my hands shaking.
I told them to stop, to think, to understand that the ocean would kill them faster than the infected. But reason had no place here. Fear had eaten it alive. The man in the suit lunged for the release lever, and in that instant the crowd surged forward. The deck erupted into chaos. Passengers shoved past me, clawing at the ropes, fumbling with the mechanisms they didn't understand. The lifeboat swung dangerously, half-lowered, banging against the hull with a hollow thud. Someone screamed as the ropes burned their hands. Another fell to the deck, trampled underfoot.
I fired a warning shot into the air.
The sound cracked like thunder, freezing them for a heartbeat. Then the infected arrived. Drawn by the noise, they poured from a stairwell, crew and passengers alike. Their eyes clouded, their mouths dripping red. They moved fast, too fast, slamming into the crowd with a hunger that shredded flesh and bone. The deck became a slaughterhouse. Screams rose into the night, mingling with the crash of waves and the groan of steel. I should have run.
I should have left them to their fate.
But the girl was there, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide with terror. She had followed me, trusting me, and now she was trapped in the chaos.
I grabbed her hand and pulled her behind me, firing into the horde.
Each shot echoed across the water, each bullet tearing through the night, but there were too many. The lifeboat broke free. It crashed into the sea, half full of passengers, their screams carried away by the wind. For a moment I thought they might make it. Then the boat capsized, swallowed by a wave, bodies thrashing before vanishing beneath the surface. The ocean took them as surely as the infected would have. The deck was slick with blood, the air thick with smoke from a fire that had started near the galley. I dragged the girl toward the stairwell, my lungs burning, my ears ringing. Behind us, the infected feasted on the fallen, their snarls drowning out the cries of the dying. The man in the suit lay sprawled across the deck, his throat torn open, his hand still reaching for the lever that had doomed them all. When we finally reached the safety of the lower corridor, I collapsed against the wall, the girl trembling in my arms. My hands shook so violently I could barely reload my pistol. I stared at the blood smeared across my uniform, at the faces of the crew who had watched from the shadows, too afraid to intervene. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but hollow. "The lifeboats are compromised. No one is to attempt escape. We hold the ship." His words echoed through the corridors, but no one believed them anymore. The passengers had seen the truth with their own eyes. There was no escape. Not by sea, not by steel, not by faith. I looked at the girl, her rabbit clutched tight, her eyes searching mine for answers. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that we'd find a way out, that the ocean wasn't the end. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do was whisper the truth, the confession that burned in my chest. "We're trapped," I said.
All of us. And the ship drifted on, silent except for the screams that still echoed from the deck above. The ship had secrets. I knew it the moment the mechanic pulled me aside, his face pale beneath the flickering emergency lights.
He whispered about a deck not listed on the passenger maps, a level sealed off long before we left Miami. He said he'd seen crews slipping down there at night, carrying crates marked with biohazard symbols. I wanted to dismiss it as rumor, but after the lifeboat mutiny,
After the screams and the blood, I couldn't ignore him. We moved through the lower corridors.
the girl clutching her rabbit, the chef trailing behind with a kitchen knife gripped tight. The mechanic led us past the laundry rooms, past storage, past the smell of mildew and rust. The deeper we went, the colder it became, the air heavy with salt and something else, something metallic. like old blood, at the end of the hall. We found it, a steel door welded shut, the paint blistered from heat. The mechanic pried at the seams with a crowbar, sweat dripping down his face. Each strike echoed through the corridor, a drumbeat that made my stomach twist. Finally, the metal gave way and the door creaked open. The air that spilled out was foul, thick with rot and chemicals.
I gagged, pulling my shirt over my mouth.
The girl buried her face in my side. We stepped inside, our flashlights cutting through the dark. The hidden deck was nothing like the rest of the ship. No polished wood, no chandeliers, no velvet carpets, just concrete walls, exposed pipes and rows of cages. Some were empty, doors hanging open. Others still held what was left of their occupants, bodies twisted, gnawed, bones scattered across the floor. My stomach lurched. This wasn't storage. This was a lab. The chef whispered a prayer under his breath. The mechanic cursed softly, his voice shaking. I walked slowly between the cages, my flashlight beam trembling. Papers littered the floor, medical charts, test results, photographs of passengers taken before departure. Each file stamped with the same word, infected. I picked one up. The photo showed a man smiling, holding a boarding pass. The notes beneath described his exposure timeline, his symptom progression, his containment potential. My hands shook so badly I dropped it. The truth hit me like a wave. The outbreak hadn't just followed us onto the ship. It had started here. The girl tugged at my sleeve, pointing toward the far wall. There, behind a cracked glass partition, was a tank filled with cloudy liquid. Something floated inside, a body, suspended, its skin pale and bloated, its eyes open but unseeing. Tubes snaked from its arms, pumping fluids into machines that hummed faintly even now. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The chef turned away, retching. The mechanic stared, his face pale.
They were experimenting, he whispered.
They brought them on board.
They knew. The sound of movement snapped us back.
A shuffle, a scrape, the rattle of chains. From the shadows of the far cages, figures stirred.
Not corpses, not yet.
Their eyes glowed faintly in the flashlight beam, their jaws working, their fingers clawing at the bars. They snarled, low and guttural, the sound vibrating through the deck. We froze. The girl whimpered, clutching her rabbit tighter. One of the infected slammed against the bars, the steel groaning under the impact. Another reached through, its nails scraping the floor. The mechanic hissed for us to move, to get out before the locks failed. We backed toward the door, our flashlights shaking, the infected growing louder, their snarls rising into a chorus of hunger. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst. I pulled the girl close, whispering that it was okay, though I knew it wasn't. As we slipped back into the corridor, I looked once more at the cages, at the files scattered across the floor, at the tank with its floating corpse. The truth burned in my chest, heavier than any weapon. The Pacific Glory wasn't just a cruise ship. It was a laboratory, and we weren't passengers. We were test subjects. The captain had always carried himself like steel, chin high, uniform pressed, voice steady, even when the ship groaned under the weight of chaos. But steel bends, and that night I watched him break. It happened during what should have been a simple rescue. A group of passengers had barricaded themselves in the casino, their screams echoing through the ventilation shafts. The captain insisted on leading the team himself. "They need to see command still stands," he said, his cigar clenched between his teeth, his eyes burning with something between pride and desperation. We forced the doors open, the smell of blood and smoke rushing out like a tide. The infected were already inside, tearing through the survivors. The chandeliers above flickered, casting strobe-like flashes across the carnage. The captain charged forward, pistol raised, barking orders that were drowned out by snarls and screams. I followed, dragging the girl behind me, my heart hammering. The fight was chaos. Gunshots cracked, glass shattered, bodies fell. I swung a chair into one of the infected, its skull splitting with a sickening crunch. The chef slashed with his knife, the mechanic swung a wrench, the captain fired until his revolver clicked empty. For a moment it seemed we might hold the line.
Then I heard it, the guttural snarl, the tearing of flesh. I turned and saw him. The captain, our anchor, our last symbol of order, pinned beneath an infected crewman.
Its teeth sank into his shoulder, blood spraying across his immaculate uniform. He roared, shoving it off, firing point-blank into its skull, but the damage was done. His eyes met mine across the chaos, and in that instant I saw the truth. He knew. We dragged him back to the bridge, his face pale, his breath ragged. He refused help, waving off the medic with a trembling hand. "Seal the doors," he ordered. "No one comes in."
No one goes out. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he lit another cigar, the flame flickering against the sweat on his brow. Hours passed.
He sat in his chair, staring out at the endless black sea, smoke curling around him like a shroud. The crew whispered, their eyes darting toward him, toward the spreading stain on his shoulder. The girl clutched her rabbit, hiding behind me, too young to understand but old enough to feel the dread. Finally, he stood. His legs trembled, his face grey, but his voice carried the same authority it always had. "The ship is not yours to save," he said.
"It's mine."
"And I'll go down with it." He handed me the logbook, its leather cover worn, its pages filled with his neat handwriting. "You write now," he told me. "You decide when we anchor, when we fight, when we run. You're the spine now." I wanted to argue, to beg him to fight, to cling to the illusion that he could still lead us. But his eyes silenced me. They were calm, resigned, already looking beyond. He walked to his cabin, closed the door, and locked it from the inside. We waited. At first there was silence. Then came the sound of glass shattering, furniture overturning, a guttural roar that didn't belong to the man we knew. The crew flinched, some reaching for their weapons, others whispering prayers.
I stood frozen, the logbook heavy in my hands, my throat dry. The noises stopped. When we finally forced the door open, the room was empty.
The window was shattered, the curtains flapping in the sea breeze. Blood smeared the sill, trailing down the hull into the black water below. The captain was gone. Some said he jumped before the infection could take him. Others whispered he had turned and thrown himself into the sea, carried away by the current. I don't know which is true.
All I know is that his boots were neatly placed by the bed, his cap resting on the desk, and the words he left scrawled on a torn page of the logbook. "It's not ours to save." I never told the others what it said.
I kept it to myself, a weight heavier than any anchor. From that night on, they looked to me. I didn't want it, didn't deserve it, but leadership isn't about choice. It's about silence, about filling the void left behind. The captain was gone, and the Pacific glory was mine to carry. The ship's heartbeat was gone. Without the engines, the Pacific glory drifted like a corpse on black water, but the captain's last order still echoed in my head. "Keep her alive." That meant going below, into the belly of the ship, where the air was thick with oil and shadows.
I didn't want to go. None of us did.
But the mechanic swore he could coax life back into the turbines if we reached the control panels. We descended the narrow stairwell, flashlights cutting through the dark. The girl clung to my side, her rabbit pressed against her chest, her eyes wide. The chef followed, knife in hand, muttering prayers under his breath. The mechanic led, his wrench slung across his shoulder like a weapon. The deeper we went, the louder the ship groaned, steel shifting under the weight of the sea. The engine room was a cavern of shadows. Massive turbines loomed like sleeping giants, their surfaces slick with condensation. Pipes hissed, dripping water that echoed like footsteps. The smell was suffocating, diesel rust, and something else, something sour and rotten, My flashlight beam swept across the floor, catching streaks of blood smeared along the grates. We weren't alone. The first sound was a shuffle, faint but deliberate. Then came the growl, low and guttural, vibrating through the steel. Figures stirred in the shadows, their movements jerky, unnatural. Crew uniforms hung in tatters, faces pale and torn, eyes clouded with hunger. They had been engineers once, men who kept the ship alive.
Now they were part of the infection, guardians of a tomb. The mechanic cursed under his breath. "We need the control panel," he whispered.
"It's on the far side." The far side meant crossing the floor, weaving between turbines and shadows. I tightened my grip on the girl's hand, my pistol heavy in the other. We moved slowly, each step echoing too loud, each breath a betrayal. The chef's knife glinted in the dim light, his knuckles white. One of the infected turned its head, sniffing the air. Its jaw hung loose, teeth slick with blackened blood.
It snarled, the sound sharp and hungry, and then it lunged. Chaos erupted. I fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space.
The bullet tore through its skull, spraying the wall with gore. The others stirred, their growls rising into a chorus. They came fast, too fast, crawling over pipes, slamming into steel, their hands clawing for flesh. We ran. The mechanic sprinted toward the control panel, wrench swinging. The chef slashed wildly, his blade carving through pale flesh. I dragged the girl behind me, firing until the pistol clicked empty. The infected swarmed, their snarls echoing through the chamber, their bodies slamming against the turbines with bone-shaking force. The mechanic reached the panel, his hands flying across the switches. Sparks erupted, lights flickered, the turbines groaned. For a moment, hope surged in my chest.
Maybe he could do it.
Maybe the ship could live again. Then one of them grabbed him. It came from the shadows, slamming into his back, teeth sinking into his neck. He screamed, wrench clattering to the floor. Blood sprayed across the panel, shorting the circuits, sparks raining down. The turbines shuddered, then fell silent again. I fired my last bullet into the infected skull, but it was too late. The mechanic collapsed, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. He looked at me, blood bubbling on his lips.
"Keep her alive," he whispered, his gaze flicking to the girl.
Then his eyes went glassy. The chef pulled me back, shouting that we had to go. The infected were closing in, their snarls filling the chamber, their hands clawing at the grates. I grabbed the girl, dragging her toward the stairwell, my heart pounding, my chest burning. Behind us, the mechanic's body twitched, his fingers clawing at the floor. We slammed the door shut, the sound of fists pounding against it almost immediate. The chef leaned against the wall, gasping, his knife dripping red. The girl buried her face in my chest, trembling. I held her tight, my hands shaking, my mind reeling. The engine room was lost. The mechanic was gone. The ship was still dead, and the infection had claimed another piece of us. The grand ballroom had once been the crown jewel of the Pacific glory. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, polished marble floors gleamed beneath velvet drapes, and a stage stood ready for music that would never play again. I remembered walking through it on embarkation day, the air thick with perfume and laughter. Now, as I pushed the doors open, the smell that hit me was rot. The chandeliers still swayed, but their light was dim, flickering in and out like dying stars. Tables were overturned, chairs splintered, silverware scattered across the floor. And in the center of it all, beneath the fractured glow, they feasted. Dozens of infected, maybe more, hunched over bodies strewn across the marble. Their jaws worked in grotesque rhythm, tearing flesh, snapping bone. The sound was wet, obscene, echoing through the cavernous hall. Blood pooled beneath them, spreading across the floor like a dark tide. The air reeked of copper and decay, thick enough to choke. I froze in the doorway, The girl pressed against my leg, her rabbit clutched so tightly it seemed split. The chef gagged, covering his mouth, while the mechanic's absence burned fresh in my chest. For a moment none of us moved. The infected didn't notice us, too consumed by their feast. Then one of them lifted its head. Its face was slick with blood, its eyes milky, its jaw unhinged wider than it should have. It sniffed the air, lips peeling back in a snarl. The others followed, heads turning in unison, their growls rising into a chorus that rattled the chandeliers. And then they charged. The ballroom erupted into chaos. I fired, the muzzle flash lighting the room in staccato bursts. Each shot tore through flesh, but for every one that fell, two more surged forward. The chef swung his knife, slashing wildly, his face twisted in terror. The girl screamed, her voice piercing through the cacophony. I grabbed her, pulling her behind an overturned table. Bullets ricocheted off silver trays, glass shattered, chandeliers swayed violently. The infected slammed into the barricade, their claws scraping across the wood, their snarls inches from my face. I shoved the girl beneath the table, whispering for her to stay quiet, though my own voice shook. The chef fought like a man possessed, his blade flashing, his arms slick with blood. He screamed curses, prayers, anything to drown out the horror. But they overwhelmed him.
I saw them drag him down, teeth sinking into his arm, his shoulder, his throat.
His scream cut off in a gurgle, his knife clattering to the floor. I wanted to help him. God, I wanted to. But the girl was still there, her eyes wide, her rabbit clutched to her chest.
I couldn't move. I couldn't risk it.
I stayed hidden, listening as the chef's body was torn apart, his blood joining the tide on the marble floor. The infected turned back to us. Their snarls grew louder, their bodies slamming against the barricade. The table cracked, splinters flying.
I fired again, each shot deafening, each bullet carving a path through the horde.
But my magazine ran dry, the click of the empty chamber louder than any scream. I grabbed the girl, pulling her out from under the table. We ran, slipping on blood-dodging bodies, the infected chasing us with inhuman speed. The chandeliers swayed violently above, one finally breaking loose, crashing to the floor in an explosion of glass and crystal. The blast of light and sound stunned them for a heartbeat, just long enough for us to reach the doors. I slammed them shut behind us, the sound of fists pounding against the wood almost immediate. The girl sobbed into my chest, her small body trembling. My hands shook as I reloaded, my breath ragged, my heart pounding. The ballroom was lost. The chef was gone. The infected had claimed the ship's heart, turning beauty into horror, music into screams, light into shadow. And I knew then that the Pacific Glory wasn't drifting toward salvation. She was sinking into hell, one deck at a time. We thought the hidden deck was the end of the ship's secrets. We were wrong. The mechanic had spoken of one more place, a level deeper still, sealed long before the outbreak. He hadn't lived long enough to show us, but his notes, scribbled in grease-stained margins of the logbook, pointed the way. A service hatch near the aft cargo hold, welded shut, marked with faded stencils, authorized personnel only. The chef and I pried it open with crowbars, sparks flying as metal screamed against metal. The girl stood behind us, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide with fear. When the hatch finally gave, the air that spilled out was colder than the sea breeze, heavy with mildew and something chemical, like bleach, masking rot. We descended a narrow ladder into darkness. My flashlight beam cut across concrete walls, pipes dripping condensation, wires dangling like veins. The sealed deck wasn't meant for passengers. It wasn't meant for anyone. It was a place built to be forgotten. The corridor stretched long and narrow, lined with heavy doors. Each bore a number, each reinforced with steel. Some were dented from the inside, claw marks etched deep into the metal. My stomach twisted. Whatever had been locked down here hadn't gone quietly. We opened the first door.
Inside was a cell, bare walls, a cot bolted to the floor, restraints dangling from the frame.
The mattress was stained dark, the smell of old blood thick in the air. Papers littered the floor, charts filled with medical jargon I couldn't understand. But one word repeated over and over, subject. The chef muttered a curse, his knife trembling in his hand. The girl pressed closer to me, her small fingers digging into my sleeve.
I wanted to turn back, to seal the hatch, and pretend we'd never found this place.
But curiosity is a cruel thing. It drags you deeper, even when you know the truth will break you. We moved on.
Another door, another cell?
This one held a chair bolted to the floor, leather straps stiff with dried blood. A camera hung from the ceiling, its lens cracked, its red light still faintly glowing. I imagined the crew watching from above, recording screams, cataloguing suffering. My stomach churned. At the end of the corridor we found a larger chamber. The walls were lined with glass tanks, most shattered, their contents spilled across the floor. The smell was unbearable, rot, chemicals, seawater. Inside the intact tanks floated bodies, suspended in cloudy liquid. Some were human, others not. Their limbs were twisted, their skin mottled, their eyes open but unseeing. The girl whimpered, burying her face in my chest. I held her close, my flashlight trembling. The chef staggered back, his face pale, his knife clattering to the floor. "What the hell were they doing here?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. On a desk in the corner lay a stack of files, bound in leather, stamped with the cruise line's insignia.
I flipped one open.
Photographs spilled out, passengers boarding the ship, smiling, waving, unaware. Notes detailed their health, their blood types, their compatibility. My hands shook as I read the final line. Deployment scheduled, Voyage 47. Voyage 47. Hours. The truth hit me like a wave. We weren't unlucky. We weren't victims of chance. We had been chosen. The Pacific Glory wasn't an escape from the outbreak. It was part of it. A floating experiment, a controlled release, a test of how long hope could survive at sea. The chef slammed his fist against the wall, his voice breaking. They used us.
All of us. His words echoed through the chamber, bouncing off steel and glass. Then came the sound. A rattle, faint at first, then louder.
One of the tanks shook, bubbles rising in the cloudy liquid.
A figure stirred inside, its eyes snapping open, glowing faintly in the beam of my flashlight.
It pressed its hands against the glass, its mouth opening in a silent scream. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. We ran, back through the corridor, past the cells, past the claw marks, past the hatch. The sound of shattering glass followed us, the echo of something waking, something hungry. We slammed the hatch shut, welding it closed, sparks flying as the steel sealed once more. But I knew it wasn't enough. The sealed deck wasn't sealed anymore. The bridge was supposed to be the brain of the ship, but by the time we returned, it felt more like a mausoleum. The captain's chair sat empty, his boots still by the door, his cap untouched on the desk. The crew avoided looking at it, as if the absence itself might swallow them whole. I carried the logbook he'd given me, its weight heavier than any weapon, and tried to pretend I knew what I was doing. It was the mechanic's notes that led us to the black box. He'd scribbled about it in the margins, a final breadcrumb before the infection claimed him. Bridge console, encrypted transmission, CDC. At first I thought it was paranoia, but after the sealed deck, after the cages and the tanks, I knew better. The console was half dead, screens flickering, buttons unresponsive. The chef slammed his fist against it, cursing, his face pale and drawn. The girl sat in the corner, clutching her rabbit, her eyes darting to every shadow. I leaned over the panel, my fingers trembling as I flipped switches, praying something would respond. And then it did. The screen flared to life, lines of code scrolling across in green. A file directory appeared, labeled with dates and times. The most recent was stamped the night we left Miami. I opened it, and the room filled with static, then a voice. Control to Pacific Glory. Confirm containment status. Phase 1 deployment complete. Awaiting Phase 2 authorization. The voice was calm, clinical, detached. Not a plea for help, not a warning, but a report. My stomach twisted. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragedy. It was procedure. The chef leaned closer, his eyes wide.
They knew, he whispered.
They knew before we even left port. I scrolled through more files. Each one was the same, encrypted transmissions between the ship and the mainland. Updates on subjects, on exposure rates, on mortality curves. Cold numbers, stripped of humanity, reducing lives to data points. One message chilled me more than the rest. Passenger resistance higher than projected. Recommend increased stressors to accelerate collapse. Stressors.
That meant us.
The lifeboat mutiny, the lockdown, the starvation, they weren't accidents. They were variables in an experiment. The girl tugged at my sleeve, her voice small. What does it mean?
I couldn't answer.
How do you tell a child she was never meant to survive, that her life was just a line in a report? I closed the file, my hands shaking, bile rising in my throat. Then the final transmission played. Control to Pacific Glory. Phase 2 authorized. Initiate release protocol. Do not return to port. Repeat, do not return to port. The voice cut off, replaced by static. The screen flickered, then went dark. The chef staggered back, his knife clattering to the floor. Release protocol, he muttered. They weren't just testing. They were spreading it deliberately. His voice cracked, his eyes filling with tears. We're not survivors.
We're carriers. The words sank into me like ice.
I thought of the passengers locked in their cabins, pounding on steel doors. I thought of the infected in the ballroom, feasting beneath chandeliers. I thought of the sealed deck, the tanks, the files. We weren't unlucky.
We weren't victims.
We were weapons. The girl looked up at me, her eyes wide, her rabbit clutched tight. Are we going home? She asked. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her yes, that we'd find land, that we'd see the sun rise over a safe harbor. But the truth burned in my chest, heavy and unrelenting. Home didn't exist anymore.
Not for us.
Not for anyone touched by this ship. I closed the logbook, the captain's handwriting staring back at me.
It's not ours to save, he had known.
He had carried the truth alone until it broke him.
Now it was mine to bear. The chef sank to the floor, his hands covering his face, his sobs muffled by the hum of dead machines.
The girl leaned against me, her small body trembling. I wrapped my arm around her, staring out at the endless black sea. The black box had given us answers. But answers are just another kind of prison, and I knew then that the Pacific Glory wasn't drifting toward rescue. She was drifting toward release. The storm came without warning. One moment the sea was calm, black glass stretching to the horizon. The next waves rose like walls, slamming against the hull with bone-shaking force. The Pacific Glory groaned, her steel frame screaming as if the ocean itself wanted to tear her apart.
Rain hammered the decks, lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled like cannon fire. We thought the storm was the danger.
We were wrong. The first breach came from below. A shudder ran through the ship, followed by the shriek of tearing metal. Water surged up from the lower decks, flooding corridors, swallowing stairwells. The sealed doors that had once kept the infected, contained now, became traps, drowning screams echoing through the steel. The ship tilted, sending furniture sliding, bodies tumbling, chandeliers swaying violently overhead. I grabbed the girl, clutching her against my chest as we stumbled through knee-deep water. The chef splashed beside us, his knife still in hand, though what good it would do against the sea I didn't know. The water was freezing, numbing my legs, dragging at every step. The smell of salt mixed with rot, the ocean carrying the stench of death into every corner. Then we heard them. The infected didn't drown. They rose. From the flooded corridors they came, their bodies bloated, their skin pale and slick, their eyes glowing faintly in the lightning flashes. They moved through the water with jerky, unnatural speed, snarling, their jaws snapping inches above the surface. Some crawled along the walls, their fingers clawing for purchase, their mouths opening in silent screams as water poured from their throats. We ran, splashing through the rising tide, the girl's sobs muffled against my chest. The chef swung his knife wildly, slashing at hands that reached from the water. One of the infected lunged, dragging him under.
I fired, the muzzle flash lighting the corridor, the bullet tearing through its skull.
The chef surfaced, gasping, blood streaming from a gash across his arm. The water kept rising, waist deep, chest deep. The ship tilted further, alarms blaring, red lights flashing across the walls. We fought our way toward the stairwell, but the current pulled us back, dragging us toward the flooded decks. The infected followed, their snarls echoing, their pale faces breaking the surface like corpses rising from graves. Lightning flashed through a porthole, illuminating the horror. The ballroom below was submerged, chandeliers swaying beneath the water, bodies floating like broken dolls. The infected swam among them, their jaws tearing into flesh even as the sea claimed it. The sight burned into my mind, a vision of hell beneath the waves. We reached the stairwell, clinging to the railing as the ship lurched. The girl screamed as a hand shot from the water, clawing at her leg.
I kicked, my boot connecting with a skull, bone cracking beneath the impact.
The chef pulled her free, his knife stabbing down again and again until the water turned red. We climbed, dragging ourselves upward, the water chasing us, the infected snarling below. My arms burned, my lungs heaved, my heart pounded. The girl clung to me, her rabbit soaked and dripping, its seams unraveling. I whispered promises I couldn't keep, telling her we'd make it, that we'd see the sun again. At the top of the stairwell we slammed the door shut, the sound of fists pounding against it almost immediate. Water seeped through the cracks, dripping onto the floor, carrying with it the stench of rot. The chef collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding. The girl curled into my lap, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. I stared at the door, at the water dripping steadily, at the shadows moving beneath the surface. The storm still raged outside, lightning flashing, thunder rolling, waves slamming against the hull. But it wasn't the storm that haunted me. It was the truth. The ocean hadn't come to save us. It had come to feed them, and the Pacific glory was sinking, not into the sea, but into something far worse. The bridge was supposed to be sanctuary. High above the decks, reinforced with steel and glass, it was the last place on the Pacific glory where command still meant something. But when the storm passed and the waters receded, the infected came for us. They always came. It started with the pounding, fists against glass, claws scraping steel, the sound echoing through the chamber like war drums. At first it was scattered, a few strays drawn by the light. Then it grew, a chorus of snarls and shrieks, dozens, maybe hundreds, pressing against the windows, their pale faces smeared with blood, their jaws snapping. The bridge shook with every impact, the glass bowing inward, spiderweb cracks spreading across its surface. We barricaded the doors with whatever we could find, desks, chairs, filing cabinets. The chef, pale and bleeding from his arm, slumped against the wall, his knife still clutched in his hand. The girl sat in the corner, her rabbit soaked and torn, her eyes wide with terror. I stood at the console, pistol in hand, staring at the horde pressing closer. The infected weren't mindless.
Not anymore.
They moved with purpose, slamming against the same points, testing the glass, the steel, the seams. Their snarls rose and fell in rhythm, a grotesque chant that rattled my bones. I fired through the cracks, each shot exploding skulls, but for every one that fell, 3 more pressed forward. Blood smeared the windows, dripping down in crimson streaks. The chef tried to stand, his face twisted in pain.
"We can't hold them," he gasped.
His voice was hoarse, his body trembling. I wanted to argue, to tell him we could, but the truth was written in the glass, fractures spreading, lines deepening, the barrier failing. Then the lights flickered. The mechanic's last work, his desperate attempt to restore power, sputtered to life. For a moment the bridge blazed with light, every console glowing, every screen alive. The infected reeled, their milky eyes blinded, their snarls rising into furious screams. The turbines groaned below, a heartbeat returning to the ship. Hope surged in my chest, fragile and fleeting. But it didn't last. The power surged, then faltered, sparks raining from the ceiling. Consoles exploded, smoke filling the air. The lights died, plunging us back into darkness. The infected roared, slamming harder, the glass shattering in bursts, shards raining across the floor. The first one broke through. It lunged, its body crashing onto the bridge, jaws snapping, claws tearing. I fired point blank, the bullet tearing through its skull, but more followed, pouring through the breach like a tide. The chef screamed, slashing wildly, his blade carving through flesh. I grabbed the girl, pulling her behind me, firing until the pistol clicked empty. The bridge became a battlefield. Blood sprayed across the consoles, bodies slammed against the walls, glass shattered underfoot. The chef fell, dragged down by 3 of them, his screams muffled by snarls.
I wanted to save him, but the girl's sobs anchored me.
I pulled her toward the captain's chair, shoving it against the breach, trying to hold back the tide with nothing but steel and desperation. The infected clawed through, their hands reaching, their jaws snapping inches from my face.
I shoved, my muscles burning, my lungs heaving, my heart pounding.
The girl clung to my leg, her rabbit pressed against her chest, her eyes wide with terror. Then silence. The pounding stopped. The snarls faded. The infected pulled back, retreating into the shadows.
I stood frozen, my breath ragged, my hands shaking.
The bridge was a ruin, glass shattered, consoles smoking, blood pooling on the floor. The chef was gone, his body torn apart, his knife lying in a crimson puddle. I looked out through the broken windows, the ocean stretching endless and black. The infected stood on the deck below, staring up at us, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They weren't retreating. They were waiting. The girl tugged at my sleeve, her voice trembling. Why did they stop?
I didn't answer, because I knew the truth. They weren't giving up.
They were letting us breathe, letting us hope, letting us believe we had survived. And then, when the time was right, they would come again. The first whiff of smoke reached us before we saw the flames.
Acrid, bitter, it curled through the ventilation shafts and stung my eyes.
At first, I thought it was another electrical short, another console sparking itself to death. But then the alarms wailed, shrill and merciless, and the truth hit me like a wave. The galley was burning. We stumbled down the corridor, the girl clutching my hand, her rabbit trailing wet and torn. The chef was gone, the mechanic gone, the captain gone. It was just us now and the fire. When we reached the galley doors, the heat rolled out in a suffocating wave. Flames licked the walls, devouring steel and tile, smoke billowing thick and black. Pots and pans clattered as they melted, the smell of charred food mixing with the stench of burning flesh. The infected didn't fear the fire. They came through it, their skin blistering, their clothes igniting, their mouths still snapping. They were silhouettes of horror, bodies aflame, snarling as they staggered forward. The sight froze me in place, walking pyres, shrieking as they burned but refusing to fall. The girl screamed, her voice piercing through the roar of the flames. I fired, the bullets tearing through burning flesh, but it didn't matter. They kept coming, their bodies collapsing only when the fire consumed them completely. The galley was an inferno, the walls glowing red, the ceiling sagging. I pulled the girl back, coughing, my lungs searing with every breath. The ship itself was burning, and the fire was spreading fast. We ran, the corridors filled with smoke, alarms blaring, sprinklers hissing uselessly. Water dripped from the ceiling, mixing with ash, turning the floor slick and treacherous. The infected followed, their snarls echoing through the haze, their silhouettes flickering in the firelight. I dragged the girl through the chaos, my eyes burning, my chest heaving. Every step felt like drowning in smoke. We reached the promenade deck, the night air a shock of cold against my blistered skin. Flames poured from the galley windows, lighting the sky in orange and red. The ocean reflected it back, a mirror of fire stretching to the horizon. The Pacific Glory was no longer just a drifting coffin. She was a beacon, a burning signal to anyone still alive out there. The girl clung to me, coughing, her face streaked with soot.
"It hurts," she whispered, her voice raw.
I held her close, whispering lies about safety, about survival, about tomorrow. But the truth was written in the flames. Tomorrow wasn't promised. Not here, not now. The infected poured onto the deck, their bodies silhouetted against the fire, their eyes glowing in the light. They moved faster now, driven by hunger and chaos, their snarls rising into a chorus that drowned out the roar of the flames. I fired until the pistol clicked empty, then swung it like a club, the metal cracking skulls. My arms burning with exhaustion. The girl screamed as one lunged for her, its face half melted, its jaw hanging loose. I shoved it back, my boot connecting with its chest, sending it tumbling into the flames. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, thick and choking. My vision blurred, my lungs screamed, my body begged to collapse, but I couldn't stop.
Not yet. We stumbled toward the lifeboat deck, the last place anyone could call escape.
Most of the boats were gone, cut loose during the mutiny, their empty cradles swaying in the firelight. But one remained, half hidden, its ropes frayed, but intact.
Hope flickered in my chest, fragile and dangerous. The girl saw it too.
Her eyes widened, her grip tightening on my hand. "We can go," she whispered, her voice trembling. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe the fire was just another trial, another storm to survive. But as I looked back at the burning ship, at the infected pouring through the flames, at the ocean reflecting the inferno,
I knew the truth. The fire wasn't just consuming the Pacific Glory, it was consuming us, and the horizon wasn't salvation.
it was a funeral pyre. The fire drove us to the edge. Smoke poured from the galley, flames licking the night sky, the Pacific Glory burning like a funeral pyre. The infected swarmed through the decks, their snarls rising above the roar of the blaze. There was nowhere left to run except the lifeboat. It hung there, swaying in its cradle, ropes frayed, paint peeling, but intact. The last chance, the last lie. I dragged the girl toward it, her small hand clutching mine, her rabbit dangling by one ear. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide with terror. The chef was gone, the mechanic gone, the captain gone.
It was just us now and the sea. The deck was chaos.
Flames roared, steel groaned, the infected poured from every doorway. Their eyes glowed in the firelight, their mouths snapping, their bodies blistered but unrelenting. They moved like a tide, surging toward us, their snarls drowning out the storm. I reached the davit, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the ropes. The lifeboat swayed, creaking, the ocean crashing below. The girl clung to my leg, sobbing, whispering prayers I couldn't hear. My lungs burned, my heart pounded, my vision blurred with smoke. The infected charged. I fired, the muzzle flash lighting the night, bullets tearing through skulls. Each shot echoed across the waves, each body collapsing only to be replaced by another. I swung the pistol like a club, the metal cracking bone, blood spraying across the deck. The girl screamed, her voice piercing through the chaos. The ropes gave way. The lifeboat lurched, swinging violently, crashing against the hull. I grabbed the girl, shoving her inside, my hands slick with sweat and blood. She clutched the rabbit, her eyes wide, her body trembling. I climbed in after her, fumbling with the release lever. The infected reached us. Hands clawed at the boat, jaws snapping inches from my face.
I kicked, shoved, fired, my body burning with exhaustion.
One of them grabbed the rope, pulling itself up, its face half melted, its eyes glowing. I swung the pistol, the skull cracking, the body tumbling into the flames below. The lever stuck. I pulled, my muscles screaming, the metal groaning. The infected swarmed, their snarls deafening, their hands clawing at the boat. The girl screamed, clutching her rabbit, her eyes locked on mine. I pulled again, harder, the lever snapping free. The lifeboat dropped, we fell, the world tilting, the ocean rushing up to meet us. The impact slammed through my body, water spraying, the boat rocking violently. The girl screamed, clutching the sides, her rabbit soaked and torn.
I gasped, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. Above us, the Pacific Glory burned.
Flames poured from her decks, smoke billowing into the night sky. The infected swarmed the rails, their silhouettes outlined against the fire, their snarls echoing across the waves. They reached for us, their hands clawing at the air, their bodies writhing. The lifeboat rocked, the ropes snapping, the ocean pulling us away. The girl clung to me, her body trembling, her eyes wide. I held her close, whispering lies about safety, about survival, about tomorrow. But the truth was written in the flames. Tomorrow wasn't promised, not here.
Not now. The infected screamed from the burning ship, their voices carrying across the waves.
The fire roared, the steel groaned, the Pacific Glory sinking into the sea.
I watched her burn, my chest heavy, my heart breaking.
She had been our prison, our coffin, our hell. And now she was gone, but the ocean was endless.
And we were adrift. The girl looked up at me, her eyes wide, her voice trembling. Are we safe now?
I wanted to tell her yes.
I wanted to believe it.
But the truth burned in my chest, heavy and unrelenting. I looked at the horizon, at the fire reflected on the waves, at the shadows moving beneath the surface. No, I whispered, not yet. And the lifeboat drifted into the dark, carrying us toward a future I wasn't sure we wanted to reach. The fire faded into the horizon, a smear of orange swallowed by the Black Sea. The Pacific Glory was gone, her screams silenced beneath the waves, her flames reduced to smoke trailing across the sky. All that remained was the lifeboat, creaking, swaying, a fragile shell adrift on an endless ocean. The girl sat beside me, her rabbit soaked and torn, its stuffing spilling from the seams. She clutched it anyway, as if the ruined toy could still protect her. Her face was pale, streaked with soot, her eyes hollow. She hadn't spoken since we hit the water.
I didn't blame her.
Words felt useless out here. The ocean stretched forever, black and merciless. The stars above were sharp and cold, scattered across the sky like broken glass. The waves rocked us gently, deceptively calm, as if mocking the chaos we had fled. The silence was worse than the screams. At least screams meant life. Silence meant nothing. I took stock of what we had. A single jug of water, half empty. A few cans of food dented and rusted. A flare gun with 2 shots. That was it. No compass, no radio, no map. Just the sea, the stars, and the slow gnawing of hunger. The girl finally spoke, her voice small, fragile. Are we going home? I wanted to tell her yes.
I wanted to believe it myself.
But the truth burned in my chest, heavy and unrelenting. Home didn't exist anymore.
Not for us.
Not for anyone touched by the Pacific Glory. I forced a smile, my lips cracked and dry. We'll find land, I lied. We'll find safety." She nodded, trusting me, and I hated myself for it. Days blurred together. The sun scorched us by day, the cold gnawed at us by night. Our skin blistered, our lips cracked, our bodies weakened. The girl grew quieter, her eyes distant, her rabbit clutched tighter. I rationed the water, giving her more than me, though she never noticed. My stomach twisted with hunger, but I forced myself to smile to pretend it didn't matter. The ocean wasn't empty. Shadows moved beneath the surface, dark shapes circling, waiting. Sometimes I swore I saw faces in the waves, pale, bloated, eyes open, mouths moving. The infected didn't drown.
I knew that now.
They floated, carried by the current, waiting for the next ship, the next shore, the next chance. At night, I heard them. Not the ocean, not the wind, but whispers.
Low, guttural, carried across the waves.
I told myself it was the sea playing tricks, but deep down I knew better. The infection wasn't bound by land or steel. It had no borders. It was in the water, in the air, in us. The girl asked me once if her parents were waiting on shore.
I couldn't answer.
I just held her close, whispering lies about reunions, about safety, about tomorrow. She cried into my chest, her tears hot against my skin.
I stared at the horizon, my eyes burning, my heart breaking. On the fourth day, I saw it, a shape on the horizon.
At first, I thought it was a mirage, a trick of the sun. But as the hours passed, it grew clearer. A ship. White hull, tall masts drifting slowly toward us.
Hope surged in my chest, fragile and dangerous.
I fired the flare, the red streak arcing across the sky, burning bright against the dark. The girl's eyes lit up for the first time in days. She clutched my arm, her voice trembling. "We're saved." I wanted to believe her.
God, I wanted to.
But as the ship drew closer, I saw the truth. The decks were empty. The windows shattered. The hull scarred with claw marks. It wasn't rescue. It was another grave. The girl didn't see it.
She only saw salvation. I held her close, my chest heavy, my throat tight.
I whispered the only truth I could bear to speak. We're not saved. Not yet. And the lifeboat drifted on, carrying us toward the ghost ship waiting in the dark. At first, it looked like salvation. The silhouette rose from the horizon, white hull gleaming faintly in the moonlight, its decks towering above the waves. The girl saw it before I did, her small hand tugging at my sleeve, her voice breaking with hope.
"Look," she whispered, pointing.
"We're saved." I wanted to believe her.
God, I wanted to.
After days adrift, skin blistered by the sun, lips cracked from thirst, the sight of another ship felt like a miracle. I fired the last flare, the red streak arcing across the sky, burning bright against the dark. The girl clapped her hands, her eyes wide, her rabbit clutched tight. The ship drew closer, too close. Its decks were silent. No crew lined the rails, no voices called out, no lights flickered in the cabins. The windows were shattered, curtains flapping in the sea breeze.
Rust streaked the hull, claw marks etched deep into the paint.
The lifeboats were gone, their cradles empty, ropes dangling like nooses. We climbed aboard anyway.
What choice did we have?
The ladder creaked beneath our weight, the ocean slapping against the hull. I pushed the girl up first, her small hands gripping the rungs, her rabbit bouncing against her side. My arms burned, my chest heaved, but I forced myself upward, the flare gun tucked into my belt. When we reached the deck, silence swallowed us whole. The ship was a grave. Chairs lay overturned, tables splintered, plates shattered across the floor. Half-eaten meals still sat on trays, their food rotted, crawling with maggots. Blood smeared the walls, handprints trailing into the shadows. The air was thick with salt and decay, the smell of death clinging to every surface. The girl clutched my hand, her eyes darting to every shadow. "Where is everyone?" she whispered. I didn't answer. We moved through the corridors, our footsteps echoing too loud. The silence pressed in, heavy, suffocating. Every door we passed was ajar, every cabin ransacked, sheets torn, mirrors shattered. In one room, a suitcase lay open, clothes spilling out, a child's toy car resting on the floor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, then dropped it when I saw the blood smeared across the wheels. The bridge was empty. The captain's chair sat overturned, the consoles dark, the windows cracked. Papers littered the floor, charts marked with frantic scribbles, coordinates crossed out, circled, abandoned. A radio sat on the desk, its speaker cracked, its light flickering faintly. I turned the dial. Static filled the air, then a voice. "Do not trust this ship." The words crackled through the speaker, distorted, broken, but clear enough to freeze my blood. The girl whimpered, clutching her rabbit tighter. I stared at the radio, my throat dry, my heart pounding. The voice repeated, softer this time, fading into static. "Do not trust this ship." The chef's words echoed in my head. "We're not survivors. We're carriers." I looked around the bridge, at the blood smeared across the walls, at the shattered windows, at the silence pressing in. This wasn't rescue. This was another experiment.
Another coffin drifting on the sea. The girl tugged at my sleeve, her voice trembling. "Can we stay here?" I wanted to say yes.
I wanted to give her something, anything to hold on to. But the truth burned in my chest, heavy and unrelenting.
I looked at her wide eyes, at the rabbit clutched in her arms, and whispered the only answer I could. No. We left the bridge, our footsteps echoing through the empty corridors.
The ship groaned, its steel frame shifting, its shadows deepening. I felt eyes on us, though the halls were empty. I heard whispers in the static, though the radio was silent. The girl clung to me, her body trembling, her voice small. Where do we go?
I didn't know.
The ocean stretched endless, the horizon dark, the future uncertain. But I knew one thing. The Pacific glory was gone, and this ship was worse. The sea is endless. It stretches in every direction, black and merciless, swallowing ships, screams, and secrets alike. I sit in the corner of this so-called rescue vessel, the girl asleep beside me, her rabbit clutched tight, its seams unraveling. Her breathing is shallow, fragile, but steady. For now, I should feel relief. We escaped the Pacific glory, we survived the fire, the storm, the lifeboat. But the silence here is worse than the screams. The corridors of this ship echo with absence, half-eaten meals left to rot, doors swinging open, blood smeared across the walls. No crew, no passengers, just us and something else. At night I hear it. Footsteps pacing the deck above, slow and deliberate. A door creaking open, then slamming shut. Whispers carried through the ventilation shafts, low and guttural, words I can't understand. The girl doesn't hear them. Or maybe she pretends not to. Children are better at surviving lies than adults. I keep the flare gun close, though I know it won't matter. Weapons don't kill whispers. They don't kill the truth. And the truth is this: the ocean doesn't cleanse. It carries the infection, the screams, the lies. It carries us. Sometimes I think about the captain, his boots by the bed, his words scrawled in the logbook. It's not ours to save. He was right. We were never meant to save anything. We were meant to spread it, to drift from port to port, ship to ship, until the world itself was just another sealed deck, another experiment. The girl stirs in her sleep, murmuring something I can't hear. I brush the hair from her face, whispering promises I don't believe, that we'll find land, that we'll find safety, that the ocean will let us go, but the horizon is dark. The gulls that circled us days ago are gone. The sea is too quiet, too still, and the footsteps are closer now,
echoing down the corridor, steady, patient. I close my eyes,
listening to the rhythm of the waves, the creak of the hull, the sound of something moving in the dark. The ocean keeps its secrets, and now so do I.